adjustment for 2026. It will be going up by 2.8%, and on average, that will amount to about a $56 increase. Tesla recalling more than 63,000 Cybertrucks.
The front lights are too bright, which may cause a distraction to other drivers and increase the risk of a collision. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says that the recall includes certain Cybertrucks with a model year between 2024 and 2026. The vehicles were made between November 13th, 2023 and October 11th, 2025, with operating software versions prior to 2025.38.3. The agency said that Tesla is not aware of any collisions, injuries, or fatalities related to the condition. Keith Peters, Washington.
More at srnnews.com.
Psalm 18 and verse 30 gives us this word of confidence in God. As for God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord is tried. He is a buckler to all those that trust in him. God's promise of confidence in him in Psalm 18, verse 30.
Did you know VCY America offers dramatic children's programming every day? Listen Saturday mornings, Sunday afternoons, and late weekday afternoons, right here on VCY Radio.
You're listening to VCY America Worldwide, KVCX Gregory, and WVIW Bridgeport.
History was made on today's date. Stay tuned for an American Minute with Bill Federer.
The United Nations was established by charter on this day, October 24th, 1945. One of the first presidents of the UN General Assembly and chairman of the UN Security Council was Philippine General Carlos Romulo. He served with General MacArthur in the Pacific and was ambassador to the U.S. General Carlos Romulo stated, "Never forget, Americans, that yours is a spiritual country. Yes, I know you're a practical people. Like others, I've marveled at your factories, your skyscrapers, and your arsenals. But underlying everything else is the fact that America began as a God-loving, God-fearing, and God-worshiping people."
This has been an American Minute with Bill Federer. For a free transcript, call American Minute at 1-888-USA-WORD.
VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And thank you for joining us on Crosstalk. Today is United Nations Day. It was on this day 80 years ago that the United Nations came into being by the signing of the UN Charter. The UN was created to maintain international peace and security and develop friendly relations between the nations, longing for international cooperation. Let me ask you, friends, how's that working out? So much of the world is sitting on a powder keg today. Instead, we have the UN that is lusting for control over the world's energy, over the world's food supply, over the world's housing, the world's transportation, the world's health care, and even the world's education. As a matter of fact, the UN has just released a report titled Homeschooling Through a Human Rights Lens. Our guest today states in a report written about this that it was overseen by a communist and outlines the most draconian global assault on homeschooling in history. It claims governments must take total control if they allow homeschooling at all. Joining us today on Crosstalk, we welcome Alex Newman. You know him as an award-winning international freelance journalist. Alex is an author. He is a researcher, an educator, and consultant, senior editor for The New American, co-author of Crimes of the Educators, and author of Deep State, the Invisible Government Behind the Scenes, and Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. He's founder and CEO of Liberty Sentinel, a national syndicator of radio and TV programs, including Behind the Deep State, that airs on WVCY Television and VCY.TV. Alex, good to have you back here on Crosstalk.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Jim.
So we're going to hone in on the education aspect in just a bit, specifically the UN attack on home education. But today, Alex, 80 years of this organization, war fighting certainly has not stopped, but meddling into the sovereignty of nations certainly has. Your comments?
Yeah, it's truly incredible the amount of power that the United Nations has usurped over the last 80 years. And they've made clear that this is just the beginning. In fact, last year, you and I spoke, almost a year ago, a little bit over a year ago in September, I was at the UN Summit of the Future at the UN General Assembly. This was for their 79th birthday. And they just kind of came out of the closet. They said we were going from UN 1.0, which was, of course, supposed to supposedly deal with peace and security, to UN 2.0, that they said very proudly was going to now oversee the environment and education and the economy and the internet and basically every field you can think of. So they're getting very, very bold now in terms of publicly admitting their ambition to rule and micromanage every part of our lives. And, of course, now they're coming for homeschoolers. So,
Alex, has anything good come out of the United Nations?
I've been asked that, and I've put some serious thought into it, and I really can't think of much. I mean, occasionally they make lofty promises, like we're going to fight world hunger, but if you actually look at the fruit of what they're doing, which we're commanded to do as Christians, what you see is exactly the opposite. Wherever the UN's policy recommendations are followed, you see a collapse in food production, you see a destruction of economic prosperity, you actually see a harmed environment. And this stuff is very easy to figure out, right? I mean, just take any of these issues that they're looking at and just apply reality to it. Let's take the environment as one, because that's the pretext for so much of what they do. If they truly believed in protecting and preserving the environment, we know how to do that, right? Just look at the cleanest countries in the world: United States, Switzerland, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Japan. What do they all have in common? Well, they have in common relatively free markets, solid protection for private property rights, etc., not collectivism, not socialism, not communism. Then you look at the filthiest countries in the world, the most environmentally destroyed countries in the world. You've got communist China, you've got Uzbekistan, you've got the different countries that have flirted with or gone full communist. The environment is totally destroyed. And yet if you look at the UN's policy recommendations, yes, they claim it's to protect the environment, but these policy ideas actually destroy the environment. The same is true with prosperity and every other issue you look at.
So, Alex, as we could actually take this whole entire week and then some, solely focusing on the UN and its many, many tentacles, but I'm going to hone in on this aspect of education, specifically even a side aspect of this home education today, and we're going to be talking about the contents in this newly released report. And before we discuss what's in this report, let's talk about where it's coming from. It mentions UNESCO and the Global Education 2030 Agenda. So before we talk about contents, help us understand what is UNESCO, what is Global Education 2030?
Well, thank you, Jim. So UNESCO is a specialized UN agency that, in theory at least, deals with education, science, and culture. That's where UNESCO comes from, the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. It was set up in the aftermath of World War II under the guise of, as they put it, building peace in the minds of men. And their thinking was, at least public-facing thinking, the marketing slogans were, we're going to tell children how important it is to have peace while they're getting a so-called education, and then we'll work on ending war through that. Now, if you look at what actually happened, and this happened very, very early on, even as early as 1948, 1949, they were putting out pamphlets and material arguing that education needed to combat family attitudes, needed to give children new attitudes and values. So very early on, they were clear about this. And if you look at the people who were in charge, even going back to the very beginning, the first Director General of UNESCO was named Julian Huxley. This is a guy who was best known for his leadership in the British Humanist Association and the British Eugenics Society. Now, for those who aren't familiar with these organizations, the British Humanist Association, this was an extension of the global humanist movement, and it was all based on the Humanist Manifesto, which we've talked about on this program before, Jim. John Dewey, the founder of America's public school system, was one of the co-authors and signers. And right at the beginning, it tells you, literally the first plank of the Humanist Manifesto, the Humanist Manifesto 1, is that we humanists, we religious humanists, believe the universe is self-existing and not created. Right, and so you compare that with the scriptures. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, as Genesis 1:1. we see clearly that we have a conflict here. The rest of the Humanist Manifesto is very much communism dressed up in religious garb, right? But, I mean, the religion is clear. There is no real God. That means you're a God, I'm a God, which is just a slight restating of Genesis 3:15, where the serpent tells Adam and Eve that ye shall be as gods.
Yep.
So it's a religion from the pit of hell. This is the guy they put in charge of UNESCO. His other important hat was leading the British Eugenics Society. For those who aren't familiar with eugenics, this is the ideology that animated the Nazis, the National Socialist movement. They believed that some races were better than other races, and that if we could selectively breed human beings like we do with cattle or dogs, that we would thereby improve the state of the race. And they very much believed that Europeans were superior to other peoples. I mean, they're just absolutely absurd from a biblical perspective and from a scientific perspective ideas. But that's who they put in charge of UNESCO. So this is the organization that from the very beginning was meant to become kind of a global school board, and they've been working on that ever since.
And so when they say Global Education 2030, that's really one spoke of the 2030 agenda wheel, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and I should have addressed that. Thank you, Jim. So the 2030 agenda, for those who are not familiar, this was approved in 2015. I think the best way to think of it is kind of like the Soviets had, the 5-year plans and the 10-year plans. Well, the UN has the 100-year plan. That's Agenda 21. Then they have the 15-year plan. So from 2000 to 2015, they had the Millennium Development Goals. From 2015 to 2030, they had the Sustainable Development Goals, or the 2030 Agenda. There are 17 of these, and I encourage people to read them. It's not a tough read. It's not a heavy lift. The head of the UN General Assembly, when these were approved by every government in the world, called it the Master Plan for Humanity. And I'm quite sure God had a good chuckle about that.
Yes, yes, indeed.
That's their master plan for humanity. And the 17 goals, it's essentially a blank check to the United Nations on our liberty, on our money, on our property. And you can read it. Again, goal number 3 deals with so-called health. Everybody needs government-run health care, abortions and sexual reproductive health care for everyone, mental health for everyone, vaccines for everyone, and on and on. Goal 10 requires, or I should say purports to require, not just the national redistribution of wealth, not just national socialism, but also international redistribution of wealth. It says that we have to reduce and eliminate wealth inequality, that we can only do this by sharing the wealth. This is all stated in the text. Anybody can go read it. And then goal number 4, again, one of 17 goals, deals explicitly with education. It says everyone must receive what they call a quality and equitable education, which means something very different than what normal Americans would think.
Right.
And then they spell out specifically what you must learn: global citizenship, diversity, gender equality, which for the UN means smash the nuclear family. So that's where all this is coming from.
Okay, Alex Newman with us today. Friends, it's also important, and as we talk about this report, to understand who supervises this. And Alex, you reveal who supervised this report and their very questionable background.
Yeah, it's almost like a parody, Jim. Like if I was going to make fun of the UN and come up with a funny fiction story, this is what I would do. But this is true, and anybody can go read the report. Right in the acknowledgement section, right before the report even starts, it says that the report was prepared under the supervision of Chang Guang-chol, and he is identified as the chief of the UNESCO section of education policy. So he's the head of education policy at the UN's Global Education Ministry, if you will. And so I looked him up, spent a little time digging into his background, and turns out his last job was actually a bigwig at the North Korean Ministry of Education, which operates literally the most Orwellian comprehensive system of indoctrination and brainwashing that exists anywhere on the planet. I mean, they are literally brainwashing these little children to worship their mass-murdering dictator, Kim Jong-un. So that's his background. He's a North Korean communist. He was educated in a North Korean indoctrination camp masquerading as a university, and now he is the chief of education policy at UNESCO.
And this is so amazing, and so, the irony here, because this report, this October 2025 released report, Homeschooling Through a Human Rights Lens, this man knows nothing about human rights, but violated human rights. And, we look just at the title of this, Alex, and many would say, oh, good, finally, the UN is recognizing homeschooling as being a human right. But that's not the take when you read the contents, is it?
Not at all. Unfortunately, it argues that to uphold human rights, governments must either outright banish or at least very tightly control all education led by parents. And they make some very interesting arguments to that effect. But it goes to prove something that I've been saying for many, many years, Jim, and that is that we need to recognize the UN's human rights agenda is actually a mortal threat to real human rights. And so when people wonder, how is it that a North Korean communist or the Chinese Communist Party, which has murdered more people than any government in the history of the world, how is it that they can embrace this UN idea of human rights? Well, that's because it's exactly the opposite of what the Bible presents as human rights. It's exactly the opposite of what America's founding fathers understood were God-given rights as revealed in the Scriptures.
And that's why you say, you state in your report, if the UN agenda is not stopped, parents and even private schools that refuse to comply with this UN's outrageous demands will be accused of violating the human rights of children.
Yes, and that is the long-term agenda. And, Jim, I've known this was coming for over 15 years now, and I didn't mention this in my article about this, but I'll share it here. In 2010, 2011, I was living in Sweden, not on purpose, but my wife, God bless her, is from there. So we were stuck in Sweden for a time. It was very difficult for me to bring her over here with U.S. immigration law.
Alex, let me just have you pause here because we're 3 seconds from a break, and we'll get into the message here that you have to share on Sweden. But, friends, we're talking about the UN's attack on homeschooling and really their lustful control for education to take control of the minds of your children, your grandchildren. We'll be back to discuss more on this in just a moment. This is Crosstalk coming your way from the VCY American Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, geologist and president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, what's the source of natural gas?
Chris, natural gas is a result of a variety of life processes. Even the digestion of your food produces methane gas. Methane gas is also found in volcanic eruptions and in meteorites, so it's evidently a chemical that can form under a variety of conditions. A new theory has been proposed that the huge deposits of methane gas are really the inorganic outgassing of the Earth's interior. These huge pockets of pure methane in many ways don't appear to be life gases with all the impurities that would be there. I lean to such a theory myself. God created this Earth for man's good, and methane is a very good part of our existence. It's hard to know for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me from a back to Genesis perspective.
Thanks, Dr. Morris. For more information, you can find us on the web at www.icr.org.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Our topic today is the UN's attack on homeschooling. But friends, it is not solely on homeschooling. It's on all of education. It is on parental rights. It's the attack is on national sovereignty and many other aspects as well. We're talking with Alex Newman today, an international freelance journalist, has won awards, an author, researcher, educator, and consultant. And I'm talking about a report just coming out October 2025 from the United Nations. Alex, you were just, as we're heading into the break, telling us about a situation about being in Sweden. So go ahead and develop that for us, if you would.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity, Jim. So I was living in Sweden in 2010, 2011, and the government there decided to ban home education. A little bit of background on how that came to be. Back in the 90s, the Swedish government had decided to move in the direction of what they call school choice, where all schools, private schools included, would be receiving money from the government. Actually, a lot of the same arguments that we're hearing here in the United States. And that worked okay for a few years, and then the government decided that you couldn't be spending public money on all these Christian schools that were teaching children that the Bible was real, where they were praying. And so in 2010, they passed the Education Reform Act, as it was called, and they said all schools receiving public money, which was essentially all schools at that time, there was only one for the aristocrats that had not started taking the public money, must teach the government curriculum, must not allow the teaching of the Bible, must not tolerate any prayer during school hours. And so essentially they nationalized all the private schools. And in that same piece of legislation, they actually banned homeschooling outright. Now, homeschooling wasn't a big deal in Sweden. There was only a few hundred families that were homeschooling. But For me, that was a big deal. I got a call from the Homeschool Legal Defense Association here in the United States. They said, Alex, we know you're a journalist, and we know that you live in Sweden. Could you dig into this for us and maybe write some articles? So I did. I wrote articles for maybe a dozen different publications around the world. And I called the education ministry, and I said, hey, guys, I'm working on some articles for American and international publications about your new education policy, and I understand you're kidnapping homeschool children, and I understand that even as they attempt to flee the country, you're going on airplanes and dragging their kids off at gunpoint. Would you care to explain to me what's going on here? Why do you feel the need to target these people? And, my first son had just been born. We weren't at the age yet where he needed to be involved, so I wasn't, quote-unquote, homeschooling yet, but I was concerned about what was happening. And I'll never forget the response. Oh, well, all children in Sweden have a human right to education. And I didn't understand. So, well, their parents are educating them. What do you mean? They're getting a very good education. In fact, the data shows their education is probably quite superior to whatever the public schools are offering. Oh, no. All children have a human right to education in Sweden. They must have repeated that 4 or 5 times. And I realized I wasn't going to get anything else, but it made me wonder, what do they mean by that?
Right.
And that's where I understood that their vision of human rights and education is exactly the opposite of what we understand.
Wow. And really, this report from UNESCO demands governments be involved, don't they?
Absolutely. It says they are obligated under international law. And they quote a number of different international human rights instruments, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They quote the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which, in fact, they acknowledge the U.S. government has not ratified yet, and several other very important international agreements that almost all governments in the world have agreed to. And, under their interpretation of international law, you can see what they're saying. So I'll give you an example, Tim. In the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the foundational UN human rights legal instrument, it declares in Article 26 that education shall be compulsory. Right? Again, it shows you how different they understand rights than we do in America. Here, education is a service that must be provided at public expense rather than a freedom that the government must protect. Education shall be compulsory. And in that same section, Article 26, it says education shall further the activities of the United Nations. And, that's an interesting situation there. I homeschool my 6 children, as you know, Jim. We use Classical Conversations and other resources. And nowhere in the education that my children get, none of the books, none of the programs, none of the curricula, certainly not from me or my wife, do we further the activities of the United Nations. In fact, it's the opposite. We teach our children the truth about the United Nations. And so under the plain reading of that text, my child has a right to a compulsory education that furthers the activities of the United Nations. My wife and I are, under their bizarre, strange interpretation, violating the human rights of our children.
It's outrageous.
So it's very dangerous, and people need to understand that's what they mean.
Yeah, it's outrageous. And you pointed out, I mean, the United States, we're not a party to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, but they assert that the homeschool content has to be aligned with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child.
That's right, and they say that explicitly. The education content, that's their terminology, must align with the values that the UN claims are required to be taught under international law, including gender equality. In fact, they attack homeschoolers because typically mothers do the bulk of the teaching, fathers do the bulk of the bringing home the bacon, so to speak, and they say that furthers negative gender stereotypes. And so if we're going to have homeschooling, it must combat those stereotypes. So they're very, very explicit about that. They say that some homeschoolers are violating the rights of their children by trying to teach every subject through the lens of their faith, which is, of course, exactly what true Christian homeschoolers in America do, right? We teach through a biblical worldview, through a biblical lens. We teach history and science and everything else through the lens of God's Word. And the report is very explicit about that not being allowed. And I want to say something quick about the Convention on the Rights of the Child so people understand how dangerous this is. And as the report acknowledges, the United States has not ratified that yet. They often attack us because it's only the United States and Somalia that have not approved this. They say spanking and any kind of corporal discipline must be a criminal offense. Parents should be arrested. They say all decisions must be made in the best interest of the children. And I think any parent would agree with that until they realize that under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, parents don't determine what's in the best interest of their children. The government does. And so when this was implemented in Scotland some years ago, I did an article about this in the New American, the Scottish Parliament specifically said in the legislation to implement the Convention on the Rights of the Child, every child born in Scotland from here on out is going to receive a named person, a government official, who will oversee the development, education, and upbringing of that child from birth until adulthood. Direct result of this Convention on the Rights of the Child. And the UN sent their special rapporteur on the human right to education to our country. They just released a report a few months ago and said the United States government must ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and they must define education as a human right. So they were getting very bold, even with Trump in the White House.
Friends, you're tuned to Crosstalk, and I hope you understand the gravity of what we're talking about here today. And, Alex, I think it's important, again, for our listeners to understand that a curricula that's aligned with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, exactly what that looks like. We're talking things like LGBTQ instruction, is that correct?
And they say so very openly, Jim. This isn't like me speculating, like that's probably what they want. No. They say it in very clear terminology. And another recent document on this that I just alluded to, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Human Right to Education, Farida Shahid, a Pakistani lady, came over here and specifically attacked the United States and said we were out of compliance with international law because we had states like Florida, like Texas, that were doing their best to protect children from the LGBT propaganda, from the race mongering, from the critical race theory. They said that we're depriving our children of the right to explore these concepts and things like this. So they've been very explicit on this. And at UNESCO in 2018, same organization that put out this report attacking homeschooling, they put out, again, 2018, I did an article about this for the New American. I would encourage people, if you decide to read the report itself, make sure you have a barf bag handy. It's horrific. But 2018, the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education requires that 5-year-olds be taught things that I cannot say on the air, Jim, because VCY would lose its FCC license. It's horrific beyond what you can imagine, and yet they claim every child in every country all over the world must learn this film.
Yeah, it's so just shocking what they're seeking to do. I mean, we're talking, you mentioned LGBT, but sexuality education is all part of this, as you're pointing out here and alluding to that as well. And Alex, I find this so ironic because it was October 17th, 2025. I'm looking at an article from the Center Square, and then also coming from the Capital Times. It's a Madison. It's not a liberal news organization. They're liberal. And here's the headline: 200 teacher sexual misconduct grooming cases being shielded from the public. And so evidently last week there was a hearing on sexual misconduct and the grooming that's going on in Wisconsin schools. That's in the government school system.
Oh, this is an epidemic, Jim. 20 years ago, the U.S. Department of Education did a study, and they found that 1 in 10 victims of public schools in America had been sexually assaulted or molested by a staff member at the school. That's 10% of the population. They refused to do another study because they know the numbers would be worse. And to take it back to the UN for a moment, the UN's own numbers, the UN's own data reveal that somewhere north of 60,000 women, and mostly children, were raped by UN peace troops just over the last decade. None of them have faced legal consequences because they all have diplomatic immunity, and the scale of the problem is probably even worse than that.
Critical race theory, that's part of it too, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. And again, people can see the report from Farida Shahid, or they can read this UN attack on homeschooling report from UNESCO. Very, very clear that children need to be taught all this, they call it diversity and all these different things, but very, very clear that under the UN's international agreements, they believe every child in the world must learn this very dangerous, certainly very unbiblical view that, some races are oppressing other races, and everything needs to be looked at through the lens of oppression and oppressor. And, of course, all of this really goes straight back to Marxism, straight back to Gramsci, straight back to the Frankfurt School, the people who were determined to overthrow Christian civilization and bring about a new order.
I see also this education and the report demands respect for the UN Charter to be part of this, and also speaks of children being taught global citizenship, not national. What do they mean by global citizenship?
Yeah, it's so amazing how bold they are now, Jim, because they mean exactly what they say, right? We as Christians, we understand that first and foremost, most importantly, our citizenship is in heaven, and praise the Lord for that. We want to bring as many with us as possible through the work of Jesus Christ on the cross. And secondarily, we here in the United States, we were very blessed to be citizens of the United States of America. And that actually has been a huge blessing for us in that we've grown up with these liberties. We've grown up with a widespread availability of Bibles and the gospel and all that. But under the UN's vision, global citizenship is mandatory. In fact, the Secretary General of the UN just a few years ago declared that needed to be the purpose of education. And if we have another couple of minutes, Jim, I'll give people a quick roundup of how bold they have gotten. The UN has what they call the World Core Curriculum. Okay, this was developed by Robert Mueller. He was the Assistant Secretary General of the UN. He's often called the father of global education. He said it should be taught to every child in every school in every country. And in the teacher's manual, he's got a foreword in there where he admits that all of it is based on the work of Alice Bailey, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company, and a demon that she was channeling called Jabal Kul. He refers to him as the Tibetan teacher, Jabal Kul. He's not Tibetan or a teacher or a human being. Alice Bailey claimed to be channeling these spiritual entities that she called ascended masters. So the World Core Curriculum that the UN says should be taught to every child is based on the writings of the lady who founded the Lucifer Publishing Company and the spiritual entity she was channeling. And her most relevant book to this, I have a copy of it in my office, it's called Education in the New Age. And what she says is the purpose of education for enlightened societies must be the promotion of world citizenship, world federation, and ultimately, she says, a world brain. So this was 75 years ago, long before computers and internet and things like this. But that's the direction they're moving.
A world brain. And friends, really, that's where the UN is coming from in all of this, promoting that everybody thinks, acts, does as they demand. We're talking with Alex Newman today. Be ready to jot down a couple of websites we'll give you after the break where you can get more information on this. And friends, we're also going to be getting into the planned enforcement of this as well. How will they get you to comply? Back in a minute here on Crosstalk.
When the government uses COVID-19 edicts to restrict the gathering of the church, 3 pastors face the risk of imprisonment and fines while courageously reopening their churches in a world filled with chaos and fear. The Essential Church documentary tells the true stories of 3 churches during 2020 lockdowns. Follow their journey as they take a stand in defiance of the government using scientific, legal, and biblical perspectives to uphold their positions. The Essential Church is available on DVD for a donation of $12, or the Essential Church set for a donation of $20. The set includes Blu-ray and a DVD, along with multiple bonus features including extended interview excerpts, teasers, trailers, and more. The set also comes with a companion 70-page full-color hardcover book, taking you behind the scenes of making this movie. Call VCY 1-800-729-9829.
This is Crosstalk on VCY America. We're talking about the United Nations. Today is United Nations Day. 80 years ago today that they came into being, the signing of the UN Charter. And friends, it has been a mess ever since. And we're talking about the attack, not solely on homeschooling, though that's a major part of this report that's come up, but really it's an attack on all of education. Alex Newman has written on this extensively, not only just this new report, but on education as a whole for quite many years. And friends, you can be informed. Matter of fact, he's written a couple of books, a co-author of Crimes of the Educators, and then also of Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. Alex, I'd like you to tell our listeners how they can obtain those books, but also specifically on this topic, you've written this column through your website as well.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Jim. So either of those books, Crimes of the Educators or Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, are available through Amazon. They can also be obtained through my website, libertysentinel.org, and I can send a signed copy, although I have to charge shipping. We do have another education book coming out in just a few months, co-authored between me and Robert Bortons, called Woke and Weaponized, How Karl Marx Won the War for Education and How We Can Take It Back. So that'll be coming out in January. But I think it's really, really important for people to understand how significant this issue is. I mean, that's why I've written books on it. It's not just one of those issues that we just pay a passing glance and focus on a little bit. This is the crux of the whole agenda to de-Christianize our societies, to capture the hearts and minds of our children, and ultimately to implement this broader UN plan that we alluded to at the beginning. So I would encourage people to really become knowledgeable on this. If you have children or grandchildren, be in prayer about this and really spend some time digging into it. It's one of the most important decisions you'll ever make, how your children and your grandchildren are going to be educated. And so that article that you mentioned, that's available at the Epoch Times. It's available at my website, libertysentinel.org. I've got another article with more information coming out in the next few weeks in the New American magazine. And I would encourage people, again, to not just read this, but grab it and then share a link or copy and paste it into an email and share it with others in your community, in your church, because this is just such a critical topic. We have to understand it.
LibertySentinel.org is the website, friends, LibertySentinel.org. Or thenewamerican.com, thenewamerican.com. And just put in the word, you can put in Alex Newman or put in education, and you'll find many of Alex's writings. But specifically on this most recent UN report, UN takes aim at home education. And Alex, the report indicates that the governments are the primary duty bearers when it comes to the education of children. What does that mean, that they're the primary duty bearers?
Yeah, it's a very bold statement, and it sounds exactly like something that the North Korean dictatorship would come up with. But unfortunately, that is the official position of the UN, that the state, as in the government, is the primary force, institution responsible for the education of children, which, I encourage people to open up their Bibles. You will not find anywhere any delegation of authority over education to the state, to the government. It's an entirely unbiblical, I would argue, anti-biblical concept. The Bible squarely places that responsibility on parents. Ephesians 6:4, Proverbs 22:6, Deuteronomy 6, Deuteronomy 11. I could keep reciting Bible verses, but we know who God has actually placed as the primary duty bearers when it comes to education. And then, of course, there's certainly a supplemental role for the church, as long as parents are still ultimately the ones responsible. But the state, in the biblical understanding, has no jurisdiction over education. And yet, in this UN report, they say clearly that the state is the primary duty bearer. And it's not the first time they've said that. They said that in a 2022 Global Education Monitoring Report called Regulating Non-State Education Providers, where they tried to come up with an answer for how do we bring all these private schools under government control. And they say clearly in their same language, the state is the primary duty bearer when it comes to the education of children.
Alex, how do they plan to enforce compliance with all of this?
Well, it's very difficult when it comes to a country like the United States. If we don't choose to voluntarily cooperate, it's very difficult. They do have their peacekeeping troops, which, as we mentioned, are famous around the world for horrific crimes and atrocities. But, the U.S. Largely finances this, and so it'd be very difficult for them to impose this on us. But they're getting increasingly bold, and I don't think a lot of Americans realize this. They have an international court of justice. They call this the World Supreme Court, that all governments, including ours, just reiterated again last year, must be respected as the primary judicial body of the world. That's in the Pact for the Future that was approved last year by every government in the world. And the International Criminal Court, which we are not a party to, is becoming very, very active now in taking on people who defy the United Nations. And I can give a few recent examples. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, is currently being sought by the International Criminal Kangaroo Court on charges of violating human rights. And the state of Israel has not ratified the Rome Statute, which created this court, and yet this court claims universal jurisdiction.
Yep.
Another individual who is being prosecuted right now is the former president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte. The only time he ever came across my desk, the only time I ever wrote an article about him, was when he said the United Nations is a joke and we should leave. Well, right now he's sitting in a jail cell in The Hague awaiting trial. So they are rapidly accumulating power, and even though right now they don't have the enforcement means to make us bow down to this, as soon as the Democrats regain control at the national or even at the state level, they will do their best to bring this in quickly.
Yeah, and so, I mean, relatively, our country is safe right now under a Trump administration from seeing something like this implemented, but what if Kamala Harris had won the election, or what if Gavin Newsom becomes a future president? No security security is just not there for the American people any longer.
It's not, and Donald Trump has announced again, the U.S. government has announced that we are withdrawing from UNESCO again. This will be the third time we've withdrawn. Ronald Reagan withdrew, then Trump withdrew in his first term. But we can really understand how this might look just by looking at the last time. So in 2017, the Trump administration announced we were leaving. We left. And then as soon as Joe Biden got back into the White House, they announced that we would be rejoining UNESCO and that we would be paying arrears. So we paid them all the money that we would have paid them if we had been involved the whole time. And so this time, when Trump announced that we were leaving, when the administration announced that we were leaving, the Director General of UNESCO, a French socialist named Audrey Azoulay, put out a statement, and I was even blown away by the boldness. Said, well, we're ready to welcome you back as soon as you guys are ready to rejoin. Don't worry. And in the meantime, she said, we will continue working with our American partners, publishing companies, universities, state and local governments. So they're mocking us, and they know very well that this is just a temporary setback for their agenda.
So when I was talking earlier, too, about enforcement and compliance of this and looking at even countries outside the U.S., et cetera, they actually plan to have home visits, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. They demand in this report that if a government decides to allow homeschooling, it is necessary to have mandatory home visits so that all parents can be kept in line. It is necessary, they say, to have mandatory testing so that the government can make sure that the children are learning what the government demands be taught and really what the UN demands be taught. So the enforcement mechanisms that they are talking about to monitor and oversee parents are more Orwellian, more totalitarian than anything that exists in any one of our 50 states. There is no state in America that has anything approaching the level of tyranny that the UN is demanding and that the UN is claiming is necessary to comply with international human rights obligations.
Friends, you can get on board with us here today with your questions for Alex Newman. Our number 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. And the bigger question in all of this, Alex, how can it be resisted?
Well, I think Trump took a very important step by getting us out of the UN, and I'm hoping that now they will take some more concrete measures to make sure that the next Democrat president doesn't just get us right back in. One way to do that would be to enshrine in federal law the complete exit from UNESCO and a ban on a future president just re-entering without congressional approval. That would be very helpful. We also have to cleanse our legal statutes at the state and the federal level from anything and everything traceable to UNESCO or any of these international agreements that they have approved. And I think we need a re-understanding, really a reawakening of our understanding of constitutional principles. There's pervasive myth out there that if the federal government ratifies a treaty, that suddenly we are bound by it no matter what the treaty says. That is absurd. That's ridiculous. Thomas Jefferson wrote about this early on in the history of our republic. He said if the treaty power is boundless, what's the purpose of having a constitution, right? So Article 6 of the Constitution does say treaties become part of the supreme law of the land once they're ratified, but it has an important caveat in there. It says treaties that are made in pursuance thereof. In other words, treaties that are constitutional. So these treaties usurp powers that were never delegated to the federal government, weren't even delegated to state governments by the people of those states. So that means they don't have this authority. If they want this authority, we have an amendment process. They can ask the American people. And thankfully, the Supreme Court has ruled on this. Even as recently as 1957 in Reed versus Covert, the Supreme Court ruled that the federal government cannot just grant itself new powers by signing a treaty. So a proper constitutional understanding would really go a long way toward protecting us from this evil. But it's going to take a lot of work because Americans have been misled now for generations on this.
And many see this as being a constitutional violation for this, something like this to be implemented like we did with the, we'll change the name treaty to deal or accord or something of that nature and somehow try to skirt our U.S. Constitution. It just doesn't work that way, though.
That's exactly right. And Barack Obama was a master of this. It's actually what they did with the 2030 agenda. They said, we don't need the Senate to ratify that with two-thirds. This is an executive agreement. The same thing he called the Paris thing. I encourage people to read their Constitution. There's no such thing as an executive agreement. Presidents do not have that power. So we've got massive and flagrant violations of the Constitution. And that's one of the really good news aspects of all this. Right now, our Constitution, if understood properly and protected and implemented, would protect us from these evil ideas. But we need the American people to understand that, too.
Indeed, indeed. Let's go to Brad in West Dallas, Wisconsin. Brad, you're on the air.
Hey, Brother Jim. Yeah, we need to get out of this thing. The UN is nothing but an expensive monkey cage. So is NATO, by the way, but that's a different subject. Being in the United Nations and having them tell us what to do and do it being paid with our money just violates all of our founding documents. And the politicians that put us in there and keep us in there and put us back in there are violating their oaths of office when they do so.
Yeah.
This needs to end.
Thank you, Brad. Alex, let me ask you this. I mean, would we not do ourselves a favor? The organization trying to destroy our sovereignty, would it not do us well to see them leave the shores of the United States?
Absolutely. And I think ultimately that needs to be our objective. Thankfully, for the first time, we now have legislation in both houses of Congress to do exactly that. It's called the Defund Act, the Disengaging Entirely from the United Nations Debacle Act. It was introduced in the House by Representative Chip Roy. Actually, just a couple weeks ago, I spent 30 minutes on stage with him discussing this very issue. People can find that video on my Rumble channel. I would encourage them to do that. He articulates many of the reasons why we need to leave this really abominable organization. In the Senate, it was introduced by Senator Mike Lee. And what a great birthday present for the UN on its 80th birthday, for lots of Americans across the country listening to us right now to give their senators and their congressmen a call and tell them what they think about this issue.
Yeah. Indeed, friends, and keep in mind the switchboard for the U.S. House, 202-225-3121, the U.S. Senate, 202-224-3121. Alex Newman is our guest today, and again, friends, the website's libertysentinel.org and also thenewamerican.com. And you'll find Alex's articles there. We're up against a break, and friends, we'll come right back to the phone calls here on Crosstalk, so you can get on board with us. And so we'll be going to Rod and Terry and Jeff. Stay on the line. We'll be back in 1 minute here on Crosstalk, coming your way from VCY America.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewtube.com. Sadly, replacement theology is running rampant through Christian circles all around the world. It's the belief that God is done with the nation of Israel. And yet we know the Bible tells us that his mercies to them are irrevocable. He will finish his plan with them. But yet, many reject that. They say the church has replaced Israel. No, that's not in the Bible. And in fact, did you know that in the New Jerusalem that comes down out of heaven, as described in Revelation chapter 21, it says that the walls of the 12 gate towers that are in the walls around the New Jerusalem, that are part of the new heaven and the new earth, have the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. And then it goes on to say that the 12 foundations have the names of the 12 apostles who gave us the foundation of the church. Here you see God's distinct program for the Jews who become believers and the church. God's word is true.
You're listening to Crosstalk. It comes your way each weekday afternoon at the same time on the VCY American Network. Our guest today is Alex Newman with the UN's attack on homeschooling. But, friends, it's on all of education as well. Let's get right back to the phone lines. We have Rod calling in from Wisconsin Rapids. You're on the air, Rod.
Well, thank you for taking my call. It'd be interesting to ask these people about the hypocrisy of what they're trying to do. On one hand, they're trying to force our kids into public schools, but yet the public schools are not legally bound to teach the kids anything. And we can see that by the quality of the education that the young people are getting these days.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's the worldviews that are being espoused really don't match what true education is, do they, Alex?
No, they certainly don't, Jim. And God's word is very clear about some of these basic truths. Proverbs 9:10, Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That's the foundation of a true education. And the church fathers going back 2,000 years understood that very clearly. If you read their writings, the Bible is clear on that. And yet today there is zero fear of the Lord taught in this so-called public education system, and there's not much of anything else useful. In fact, the federal government's own data, they just released the latest National Assessment of Educational Progress report, less than 1 in 3 victims of this system are even proficient, not masters of, not good at, proficient in any core subject, reading, writing, math, less than 1 in 3, right? And we're spending $20,000 per child per year on this. It's unfathomable how the American people and how parents in particular could allow this to continue.
Our number 800-733-9829. We have Terry in Stanford, Kentucky. You're on the air, Terry.
Thank you for being there. This has become probably the most important radio program in these times. So thank you, to lift you up. Alex, all the work you do. I'm just asking you to comment on 2 different things. Alan Quist wrote a book in, I think, 2002 called Fed Ed, the new curriculum. And you're probably familiar with that, but I'd like to hear comment on that. And then did SEL, is it birthed out of the UN process, social emotional learning that's being taught even in Head Start? Thank you guys for being there. I'll get off and listen.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you, brother, for the kind words. I could probably spend the next 3 hours talking about this. I'll try to condense my remarks. I love Alan Quist and his wife, Julie. They're just amazing people of God. I'm so grateful for their work. And, this World Core curriculum that I mentioned, this is being brought to the United States through the Common Core and other things. And they actually bought ads to tell you, to brag that Common Core lined American education up with the international standards. So that's very, very clear. Social-emotional learning, it didn't originate with the UN. It actually originated with the Fetzer Institute, which is a New Age center of occultism in Michigan, founded by a New Age occultist disciple of Alice Bailey, who we talked about earlier, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. And the leading luminary for this, her name is Linda Lantieri. She's a professor of education at Columbia University's Teacher College. I have her on video admitting that she's getting her ideas from talking to her dead friends. And she said, but they're not really dead because I talk to them every night, so they're actually in a different dimension. To be clear, we're talking about doctrines of demons here, and the United Nations is pushing this worldwide now. They have a whole agency that is supposed to inject this into every school system in the world. It's called the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Peace and Sustainable Development in Education. It's headquartered in India. I was there some months ago and tried to talk to them. They were not interested. But again, what you'll find throughout it is occultism, New Age ideas, and a total restructuring of the attitudes and values of children. That is the goal that they publicly declare. And so we need to be clear, this is in virtually every public school in America. It's even infected many Christian schools. It comes from the pit of hell, and I don't think I can speak more clearly on that. A lot more to say, but I know we're very limited on time.
Jeff is calling from Appleton, Wisconsin. Jeff, you're on the air.
Thank you so much, Alex and Jim. I like to call it United Nothing or United for Evil. But just a quick note, I was put in the government schools in like 62 when the Bible was taken out and prayer was taken out of school. And I remember my mother taught me to read and my great aunt taught me math. And leaving home was about the worst thing to put me into that system. And so I'm thankful now. I go to a church where most of the families homeschool, my niece homeschool. So keeping your children underneath your wing and telling them about the Lord and teaching them what's of value, true value from the Bible. So thank you. Just promote what you're doing, and thank you so much, Alex, Jim. God bless you guys.
Thank you for your call here today. So much appreciate that. Alex, we can go back to the book of Deuteronomy, too, and where they have the message that Israelites would pass on to their children, to teach them diligently unto thy children, that shall talk to them when thou sittest in thine house, when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, when thou risest up. Bind them for a sign upon thine hand, they shall be frontlets between thine eyes. Write them upon the post of thy house and on thy gates. And it is a constant reminder to us, and there's great application that all of us can take from that passage of Scripture, that we have that important duty as parents to bring our children up in the nurture, in the ways and admonition of the Lord.
That's right. And these are biblical mandates, to be clear. These are not optional recommendations. Yes, we have a lot of liberty in Christ, but we don't have liberty to willingly and deliberately disobey these very clear commandments. And if folks want to find out the consequences of that, Scripture speaks clearly on this. Go read Psalm 78 and see what happens when fathers do not do what God told us to do in terms of passing on the knowledge of God and what he has done for us and his laws. It will end in catastrophe, and if you don't believe me, look around you today in this country.
And Alex, when we boil down this UN report, you indicate that Christians and religious instruction are really in the crosshairs. Is that correct?
That's what they're going for, Jim. It's very clear. I mean, the United States is the only country in the world that has a very significant homeschool population, numbering in the millions. To the extent that it exists in other places, it's very limited. They're coming after us, and they just put a big target on our backs. And I think the reason is clear. They know that as long as one child escapes the diabolical indoctrination that they plan for us, there's always the risk that that one child will wake up other people. We saw it with Charlie Kirk. We all know the story of the boy who pointed out that the emperor has no clothes. It just took the one to say, hey, guys, he's naked. And then everybody says, wow, he really is naked. So they're determined to stamp out Christian home education and Christian education in this country. And, I think we need to reread Daniel chapter 3. It's not an option. We're not bowing down to the golden idol under any circumstances, and that's the end of the story.
Alex Newman, our guest here today, friends. You can check out the websites libertysentinel.org and thenewamerican.com. He's written extensively on this and more to come. Alex, thank you so much for your diligent research, and thank you for carving out the time to inform our listeners.
Thank you, Jim, and God bless you.
And friends, thanks for joining us here today on Crosstalk. A very important topic, a very important issue. You are informed. The question is, will you take this, what you have learned, and share with others? God bless you. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.